I remember coming in from the airport and seeing how dark it was. I came in at around 7, 8 o'clock at night, yet there were no lights on anywhere. And I felt that there must be a real problem, and there was, of course, as they had electricity only 2 hours a day. It was dismal that when I went to the hospital, it was long days, terribly hard surgeries, a lot of trauma, injuries, and also just all the normal natural events that happen in a country of 3 million people. I really didn't know what I could do. I just did what I thought would be the best thing, and that is to come again.
Dr. Hohenessian has a true passion for his profession and for helping others. In 1992, he founded the Armenian EyeCare project. With me now is Dr. Hohenessian, who is going to tell us about the project, but before we start, let me hear a little bit about your background.
Well, I'm second generation Armenian. That means that my parents were born in America, and my grandparents came over, actually when they were in their early 20s, from Armenia. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, I spent an awful lot of time with my grandparents' house, as everyone did, and I learned from my grandfather a lot of the stories, because he had gone over in the 1920s. He'd gone back to Armenia. This was after the genocide, and he was going back to try and, with a number of other diasporan Armenians, to try and reclaim some of the lands that had been stolen from the Armenians after the genocide. Mm-hmm. So what happened is that telling me the stories of how he was able to get in and about things, he also, when I was about 12 years old, he told me that someday the call would come for me to help out the country.
Right. And
for that reason, he gave me his weapons, his knife and his gun. Mm-hmm. The gun was a kind of a very old-fashioned gun, but nonetheless it was functional. And that was so that when I got the call, this was I could take this with me to defend myself.
Right, right.
Little did I know that 40 years later, I would get the call in the form of a fax. And that was a letter from the Deputy Minister of Health, mm-hmm. that the country was in terrible shape.
Right.
In 1992.
Right. They
had an earthquake, a major earthquake in 1988 that killed off a huge number of people. Then they also had a war that had been going on since 1988 with Azerbaijan. Mm-hmm. And so there was an awful lot of war casualties, right. besides the usual number of casualties and diseases that happen in a country of 3 million.
Right, right.
So that was my first. When I saw that letter, I had to go. I mean, this was the call that I had anticipated.
Now let's talk a little bit about what you do today. Not the Armenian project, but mm-hmm. your background is with Eyes, obviously.
Yes.
Tell me about your education.
I got educated in Boston, Massachusetts, and went off to medical school at University of Vermont, and then from there came back to the Harvard training program in Boston for my ophthalmology training. Right. In the interim, in between there, I also was at National Institutes of Health for 2 years. When I went back to Mass Eye and Ear, I learned the different techniques of surgical training, and also met my wife. So it was a very good time there in Boston. Okay. I happened to be going back to give the alumni address in about 2 weeks, again on the Armenian EyeCare project. Uh-huh. But after being in Boston for this period of time, and then following that, I was in practice in a suburb of Boston. Mm-hmm. I decided that I knew places in the world where the weather was warm in February. I had missed 2 weeks in a row because the weather was so harsh in Boston that I was unable to get into the hospital to perform surgery.
Okay.
And so I just knew that this would be too frustrating for me as time went on.
Right.
So I came out to California.
Okay.
And started a practice out here.
Right.
And since that time, I've been joined by many of my colleagues that have come and joined me, and they all came from Mass Eye and Ear Infirmary, from the Harvard program, so we call ourselves Harvard Eye Associates.
Okay, and that's why I wanted people to know how you got that fax, right? And what it meant for you, because you do have the history. And now we can go into the fax because you got that. And then what did you do after you received that fax?
Well, I got the fax on a Wednesday. And it was a Wednesday night. I was the last person in the office. I was going around and looking at this, that, and the other thing. And I heard the fax go off, and I went over, and it was a fax from EyeCare Gregorian saying that because of the earthquake and all the events that have happened of late in the war, the hospitals were overrun with patients. There were patients in the corridors. They were having difficulties, and they needed help. They needed help from all surgeons. Right. And that was the letter. The letter was sent out to all Armenian surgeons.
Right.
And I couldn't say no. I mean, this was exactly what I had anticipated was going to happen sometime in my life.
Right. Now, you said it was sent to Armenian surgeons or to American doctors?
It was to Armenian American.
All of the above. Okay.
Yes, medical doctors and surgeons.
Okay.
And so they asked for help because they were worried about this overwhelming tide of diseases and blindness that was happening within the country.
Okay.
And so I felt I had to go. And so within really just a couple of days, I left on the Saturday, I left for Armenia. I first of all called my wife to make sure that it was okay with her. We had planned a vacation to London with my son, and she was already there awaiting me, and I called her up and she said, no, by all means, go.
Right.
You know, I'm envious of you to be able to help like that.
Right.
And so with her blessing, I went.
Now, tell me a little bit about some of the eye issues that you came across once you were there.
Well, it was shocking because they had only electricity for 2 hours a day, and water for only 1 hour a day. They had run out of everything. They had run out of antibiotics and anesthetics. They had run out of the gowns and gloves and so forth that we're so used to putting on. It's interesting is that I watched surgeries being done, and the surgeon would wear gloves, but the nurse would not.
Oh, gosh.
Because they just didn't have any of these things. For anesthetic, I saw some of these soldiers that had bad injuries of their eyes, and what they would do is they would come in and they'd have cut glass, broken glass in their hands, and they'd hold it because they didn't have sufficient anesthetics.
Oh, jeez.
And so they bear through this to try and with a diversion of their pain. The surgeons there were heroes. I'm just amazed at them. They worked nonstop throughout the night, day and night, and that's what the routine was. I was astounded at their abilities, and I did my part too as well to be able to help and do the surgeries. And it was something that needed to be done, and I was amazed at just how people literally lived in the hospital. Right. I operated on several people that I felt I could do the surgical procedure that was necessary because they had all the usual diseases that happen. Right. I walked into a room on one occasion, and there was a number of men who were sitting wearing sunglasses. Well, they were wearing sunglasses because they had injuries of one or both eyes. And the sunglasses were on because without them they would scare their children. I mean, they really looked quite hideous, and it was one of those things where I realized that sometimes in war produces some terrible injuries, and sometimes those injuries are man-made. They literally would injure their eyes before they released these men.
Oh.
And of course, it would then when they came back, they would have to have people take care of him, and it takes 2 people to take care of a man who is injured.
Right.
One of the other things I saw was children.
Right.
They had a large amount of children that were injured, and these kids had injuries to their hands and many to their eyes. And there's one young girl who I met that had uveitic glaucoma, and she had lost the vision to her left eye, but I was able to operate on the right eye to lower the pressure within the eye by a certain surgical procedure.
Right.
I went back home within a few months of operating on her, and I got a letter from her.
Wow.
And she said, "Dear Dr. Roger, I appreciated all the work that you did for me and the surgery that you did on my eye, and I was able certainly to be able to see well. But I've noticed by the worried look on my on my parents' faces and the averted gaze of the doctors that I'm not doing well. Please don't abandon me. Please come back and help me." And all this from a 13-year-old girl.
Right.
And so what could I do? I had to go back.
Right.
And so within a 6-month period of time, I went back again. But this time, I realized I needed to help her and the surgery I had done. So I called on a friend of mine, Dr. Richard Hill.
Okay.
And Dr. Hill is a glaucoma specialist, and he came back with me.
Okay.
And in coming back, he operated on this young woman as well as many other people. In fact, he was operating on so many people, I caught a picture of him sleeping in between surgeries. He was just napping, sitting up.
Right.
And you know, the surgeries that were done there were very difficult because, of course, all of a sudden, many times, the lights would go out.
Oh, gosh.
And so we'd be in the middle of a surgery, and someone would have to race down to the first floor to start the generator going.
Right.
One time someone had stolen the gasoline from the generator, and so we had to run down to get gas. It was just chaotic.
But you made do, and there were so many people that you helped.
Right.
And then since then, you have been traveling back there, what, twice a year?
Twice a year.
Twice a year.
Yeah. And the best part of it is, not only Rick, who's come with me nearly every trip since.
Right.
I've been there 55 times. Rick has been there at least 50 times. It's amazing how often. And, you know, with no Armenian connection. Matter of fact, none of these guys do.
Right.
Sanford Chen, a wonderful retinal surgeon, came with me. Had an experience where he was in the middle of surgery, had instruments in the eye when all the lights went out.
Oh, jeez.
And he had to stay there frozen because he couldn't remove these pieces from the eye because he was holding on to portions of the retina.
Okay.
He stayed like that for about half an hour while everything had to get up and running again.
Wow.
Others have come. Barry Cooperman, who's now the chief at UCI, has come with us in retina. And the other thing that they did is each of these doctors helped out in certain ways. I had one guy who had been hit in the eye with a rocket. And the rocket hit the eye and didn't explode. If he did, he wouldn't be alive today. But it didn't explode, it just burned. And in doing so, he had enough time to reach up, grab the rocket, and throw it away. And when he did, it blew up over there.
Oh, gosh.
But he got third-degree burns of both his hand and his face.
Right.
Well, that created a terrible injury to him.
Right.
The vision was lost, of course, but to have the entire orbit and burned tissue exposed as part of his skull was very disfiguring.
Yes.
So, same thing with him. He wore sunglasses all the time. I brought over Howard Kahn, who's a ophthalmic plastic surgeon. And Howard repaired the skin of his face so that he now looks different, of course, but he's not as fearful looking. And he doesn't scare his kids.
Well, right. And he's functioning fine.
And he's functioning fine now. And so that's the early days were by far the roughest.
Right.
But bringing other doctors with me had been really a salvation, because we all got together and sat down and figured what next could be done.
Right.
And I had thought that by bringing these other doctors, these other specialists, it would teach the Armenian doctors to become specialized, more expert in a particular area: retina, glaucoma, plastic surgery, neuro-ophthalmology, cornea. But it wasn't enough.
Right, right. Let's talk a little bit about the Armenian EyeCare project, where you kind of run down kind of what you're going into now. As you talk about your education, you have medical education, you have public education. You know, you obviously brought people in, and you're teaching the Armenian doctors as well.
Oh, sure. Oh, the whole objective was to increase the capacity of the country.
Right.
It was no good for us to come over there and do these procedures. We needed to have the doctors in Armenia be able to do these procedures. They needed to be taught.
Right.
And so we needed medical education. Public education, we were able to have, they have TV over there, and we had public service announcements that told kids, do not pick up anything in the schoolyards that looks unusual and abnormal, because there were so many kids that had exploded in their face. Public education about different diseases, glaucoma that needs to be treated, cataracts, and other disorders that they needed to know about.
Right.
But for medical education, it seemed as if it wasn't enough to provide them with books. It wasn't enough to provide them. It was necessary to bring many of their doctors over to America to train. So we arranged a fellowship program and brought over, so far we brought about a dozen of their doctors over to America for year-long training. We sponsor them and their families to come over. You can't ask someone to come for a year without their family.
Right.
So they all came over, and they trained at some of the finest institutions of the country. Several trained at UCI up at UC San Francisco, in Massachusetts and Maryland. And when they trained, they had a stipend, they had a place to live, and they had a car. And so when they went, and I promised them when they went back, they'd have all the equipment they needed for to have their own clinics.
Right.
And what you have in the picture is, this is homeowner. In Armenia, there was a disease that we learned of that was far more rampant in this country. Probably 200 to 300 kids every year, babies, develop the disease of retinopathy of prematurity.
Right, right.
And the problem with it is that the eye forms in the first month of life in everyone. It's a disease that happens throughout the world.
Right.
The eye forms in the first month of life, but the blood vessels don't emerge from the optic nerve until weeks 31 to 35.
Okay.
In the normal gestation of 40 weeks. So that means that if the child is born, if the fetus is born at 25 weeks, that the eye hasn't been vascularized. And it doesn't get properly vascularized in open air as it did when the child was in the uterus. When he's in the uterus, when he's a fetus in the uterus, his oxygen level is 27.5. It's cyanotic, but it's important because it allows other tissues to progress in the normal way.
Right.
So if he comes out and is breathing air, or as was often done, because they're so unhealthy, I mean, their lungs aren't functioning and the kidneys aren't, so they put in 100% oxygen. And when they are, it changes the eye so much.
Right.
I mean, it does allow them to survive, but they become blind bilaterally for the rest of their lives.
Right.
And so I went to a conference on retinopathy of prematurity at our meeting, and this doctor, Tom Lee, was the chief. He was giving a lecture on retinopathy of prematurity, and he's the chair at Vision Sciences at Children's Hospital in LA. And I asked him if he'd come over and join us in Armenia. His first couple of answers were, no, I can't, I've got other things to do, and so forth. Finally, he said, well, I'll ask my wife. And I knew I was dead. I mean, I know that's the kiss of death. But he did come, and has come ever since, and has been instrumental in the program.
Right.
And so that's what's been so great for me. I meet some of the finest ophthalmologists who, together we all come up with ideas about what can be done to help to eliminate preventable blindness.
Right, right. And let's talk about one of the new technologies that you have in place where you actually had somebody operating in Armenia, but the doctor who was guiding was not even there.
That's right.
So tell me about that technology.
Yeah, there's a photo of it. Now, we have microscopes that we've brought over, surgical microscopes. We brought several $1 million worth of equipment into the country. And I've done that by raising money from the diaspora. I have been so blessed by having people that understand the problem and who are willing to give, because they know that we doctors, everyone pays their own way. Right. There's no money given to anyone other than the program.
Okay.
Doctors pay their own way. They for their airfare. They stay in hotels. They pay for that themselves. Everything is paid for that way.
Okay.
So, when we ask for money for a microscope, it has television cameras in it, and we are able to transmit the surgery from Armenia all the way to America, so that it's been, the surgery can be observed by Tom Lee and be able to instruct the doctors. In fact, there he is. He's in his office, and he's telling the doctors in Armenia, look, don't go next to this stuff. Concentrate on that stuff over there, you know, and because this stuff has got the possibility of having problems.
Wow.
And he is basically the assistant surgeon.
Right.
Even though we do have another doctor who comes in from Moorfields Eye Hospital, pediatric retina specialist, and these two doctors are training the Armenian doctor.
Right.
And they've now told me they don't need to train him anymore. That he's already there. That he's excuse me. That he's already there. That he really is able to do the surgeries now on his own. Right. This has been the benefit. Right. This is what we actually yearn for, to be able to get it so that they can do these procedures on their own.
Right.
And it's been terrific.
And it's been such a successful program.
It really
Congratulations.
It's
awesome.
They've done now more than 30 of these extremely difficult cases. There's another photo in Scott of how delicate it is. We're talking about an eye that's the size of a pea. Right. And they've got these instruments in there where they're cauterizing and they're
Oh, here, look, yeah, look
eye
at that.
is the eyes of a size of a pea, and all these other things are tiny little instruments that you can barely see. Right. And the size of a small toothpick. Right. And yet they are able to do all the surgery, and they've had great success with it. It's been, in fact, so much success that this operating room that we had built with the help of USAID, we had a grant from them, getting the right instruments, the right microscopes, and they now do these procedures, and it's the only one anywhere around. I mean, in that entire, not only in that entire region, but there's only now, in America, there's only a couple of these where you've got the operating room inside the neonatal intensive care unit that's inside the maternity hospital. Right. So they don't have to transport the kid anywhere. Right. So it's been great. They've had great success, and they've had cases sent to them from other countries. Many of the countries that they had formerly had conflict with. So it's quite exciting. Right.
So you brought other countries together as well.
Right. Medical diplomacy.
Excellent.
It's wonderful.
Well, excellent. Well, it sounds like an amazing program. Let's show our slide with the website so people can find out more about how they can participate.
Sure.
Donations. How else can other people participate?
Well, it's one of those things where I've had donors come with us to Armenia so they can see what's going on. And they particularly enjoy going to the Mobile Eye Hospital. Okay. The Mobile Eye Hospital is a facility where once we had gotten the capital taken care of with all specialties in all different areas, that wasn't enough. We knew that the people in the outside, the poor people in the outside region, 2/3 of the country are in the regions. Right. And they are the ones that are really quite poor. they don't even have enough money for the gas to come to the capital where they can get the surgery done for free.
Okay.
Because they have payment for poor people. So we built a mobile eye hospital. And this mobile eye hospital has really gone around the country and been able to do, it's made 7 rotations around the country, done 250,000 examinations and another 150,000 surgeries. And it's been very successful. Most of them in cataract surgery, but there have been retinal surgeries, glaucomas, and cornea transplants as well.
Right. Amazing work.
Oh, it's been so gratifying. It's been.
I know. I can tell how passionate you are about this.
It's the honor of a lifetime. It really is.
Well, I'm sure the folks all over that are watching this now are going to be helping you out in other ways.
Okay, that'd be great.
Find out more about your program.
Sure.
And again, congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
And thank you for being with us.
Right.
And if you have any additional questions or want more information about the Armenian EyeCare project, you can go to eyecareproject.com.